The recent introduction of the Origins SIP has elicited a lot of great community conversation and debate. And it occurred to me as I was reading through comments and conversation that one unspoken but core question that kept on arising is, what is Sovryn? What is its purpose? And so what I would like to try and do is create some short videos explaining at least my view on what it is, why it's important, and where it can go. So in this first video, I'm going to talk about Sovryn as an extension of Bitcoin in a way which maybe we haven't discussed in depth as a community before. And to start it, I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to pose a mystery. For the last 25 years, we've had the internet. Everyone expected that the internet would create a huge amount of productivity gains. It would mean that productivity, individual productivity, corporate productivity, economic growth would accelerate because everyone was now so much more connected. But instead, over the last 25 years, we've seen economic stagnation. We've seen stagnation in innovation. We've seen a lack of everything that we were expecting the internet to bring from an economic perspective. Why? Now, the common answer, especially in Bitcoin circles, is that this is due to the fact that at the same time as that we've had the internet, we've also had a financial system that has been mismanaged, a monetary system that has been mismanaged. And that is true. It's part of the story. But I'd like to dive deeper into that question. You see, let's isolate, even if we expected, even if we believe that the economy has been mismanaged, do we believe that this is a really new thing, right? The Federal Reserve has existed for a long time. Our current economic institutions have existed for a long time. Big banks have existed for a long time. So maybe they've gotten worse, but how much worse could they possibly have gotten over this period of time? Especially before 2008, right? We didn't see the productivity growth there either. And you would expect that all things being equal, even if you had a bad, stagnant financial political system, that the addition of the internet would at least drive incremental growth. What we have seen is the growth of large internet behemoths, right? Companies that have used the internet to scale to enormous size and great profitability, but this hasn't translated into a more generalized sense of prosperity. And I think the reason is actually quite simple, but almost never discussed. The reason that the internet hasn't driven the type of economic growth and productivity growth that we were expecting is because the internet is 21st century high technology married to Iron Age economic thinking, right? Every single one of these internet behemoths is a feudal empire, an absolute monarchy of Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. The individuals, all of us who are participating in this digital society, have no property rights of our own. We don't own our tweets. We don't own what we do in Facebook. We don't own what we do in EVE Online. We don't own anything. We are serfs. We don't own the land on which we are working. And so the economy of the internet, despite being built on the most advanced technology, has had the socio-economic underpinnings of the most primitive societies. The lack of property rights, the lack of a native financial economic system has meant that all of the value has been extracted by these feudal lords, and there haven't been the set of incentives to drive the real productivity growth that we would expect. Then along came Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, for the first time, introduced something, and I think it really introduced one very core idea, which is that you can have digital property rights for the first time. And in 12 years, we've seen the crypto space in general go from being nothing to being a multi-trillion-dollar industry, with possibly having created 100 different unicorns, right? Creating extraordinary wealth for individuals, more than has ever been created in any time of human history. If you want to find a place where productivity growth, individual productivity, has really accelerated an order of magnitude past anything we've ever seen before, it's in the crypto space. And the reason for that is that the crypto space took 21st century technology and married it with 21st century socio-economic structure. At least the very beginnings thereof. It's not explicit yet. So people don't talk about this as what Bitcoin and crypto is doing. They talk about scarcity, they talk about sound money, they talk about internet computers, but the core understanding of the real innovation is absent from our conversation. And as a result, we're not explicitly optimizing around it. Now, Bitcoin did this, created this world where you have private property rights that are protected in a digital sphere, that are borderless and are not based on violence, and that unlock a huge amount of potential productivity. But Bitcoin today only does this for BTC. It is an innovation used and applied only to a narrow thing, which is sound money. The idea of general applicability, in other words, generalizing this idea of private property rights, that mantle has primarily been taken on by Ethereum and the smart contract ecosystem that has grown up around Bitcoin, right? So this idea that you can take this idea of digital property rights and introduce it maybe to any sphere of human activity, right? NFTs, gaming, finance, DeFi, this idea, and Web3, voting, governance, right? This idea has primarily been expressed outside of the Bitcoin space. So that is Ethereum's really huge innovation. And it is why Ethereum has managed to generate in a short space of time a huge economy of its own, a huge amount of excitement and massive wealth. So, is Ethereum the next step in this journey? Is Ethereum the next step in this creation of marrying the highest technology, the idea of a globally connected society who also can have borderless property rights? Is this purely going to happen outside of Bitcoin? And I would argue that if that were to happen, it would be a major misfortune for humankind. And the reason for that is that Bitcoin is fundamentally different to everything that is being built around it. Because Bitcoin has placed at its core a set of principles. These principles are absent from the entirety of the rest of the space. And when I talk about these principles, I'm not talking about decentralization, which is a tool. I'm talking about the principle of rules without rulers, the principles of unchanging rules which cannot be manipulated by individuals, the elimination of politics from most decision making, the fact that people can interact directly with each other with a known, reliable set of rules that are going to be unchanged. The reason this is so important is because you can't have consistent, reliable property rights if you don't have a consistent, reliable foundation, a substrate, right? If you can't start with an unreliable base and build a reliable system on top of it. You have to start with a reliable system. And that is, and continues to be, Bitcoin's huge contribution to the space. For whatever reason, none of these other projects have even attempted to try and achieve that same level of rules without rulers. So for me, when I think about what Sovryn's mission is, it is to extend this idea of rules without rulers. It is to extend the innovation and the principles of Bitcoin not just to BTC, but to generalize that principle to all property rights. And because all rights, all human rights, are effectively property rights, that means extending this principle of rules without rulers, of having a society which is based on the most solid foundation, which is Bitcoin, extending it to all things, extending it to governance, extending it to mortgages, extending it to NFTs, extending it to gaming. And I think the implications are unlike anything we've ever seen before. I think that if we get Sovryn right, we will be recreating everything. We will be generating an entirely new socio-economic structure based on this new technology and based on a principle of creating reliability which allows individuals to be sovereign rather than specific elites or specific groups. So what I think Sovryn is, what Sovryn should aspire to be, is to extend the ethos of Bitcoin, the freedom generated by Bitcoin, into a framework which is applicable to all of society. And in the next video, I'll address why this is valuable, how Sovryn can do it, which is different from the way Ethereum has done it, and how we can generate substantial network effects and value in doing so.